All right, so tonight what I'm going to be going over is three large and very important movements. And these movements are going to be the back squat, the conventional deadlift, and the flat barbell bench. These movements are commonly seen within the general population, so within your general gym, or and and it's also seen within the athletic population. It's because these movements do translate largely into the athletic population and in the different types of things that they do, such as jumping or pushing away, or even being able to move loads, right, and be able to maintain stabilization. One thing that I want to put out is you're going to notice a lot of these movements, how my body is positioned it's meant to how my body feels comfortable. And so everybody is different. And so the hand placement, the feet placement, that'll differ based upon people's bone lengths, based upon their flexibility, and so on and so forth. And that's a discussion for another time. I won't dive into that. That's very long. But just to give you an idea, it would take time to identify the movements that fit best for you or the positions that feel best for you. So try not to compare. But from here on forward, what I do want to go over is that when looking at these movements, or the movements that I'm performing, right, I'm going to give you kind of what it should look like, or what I believe it should look like. I'm going to give you some common things that are seen in these movements, compensations, right? And this happens daily. And then finally, I'm going to give you some cues that you can use to correct these compensations, right? Whether it be for the general population or whether it be for the athletic population, because at the end of the day, they both require the same exact thing. Some is that in the athletic population, it's more at a higher velocity, but we want to make sure that biomechanically we're moving efficiently and we are translating force efficiently throughout the day. So what I begin with is the squat. Okay, so the back squat in itself, it's an axial loaded movement. As you can see, the bar is on my back. It's loaded with weight. And I take an interior view, I take a lateral view, and I take a posterior view, so you can kind of identify what and how the body should be moving. And so one thing to, again, make a key point is look at the ankles, the knees, the hips, the shoulders, the neck, right? Everything in relation will tell you how the body is moving, or what compensations and how and where they're coming from. Okay. In the next upcoming videos, what I break down is in the first movement, it's going to be a knee valgus movement. So knee valgus is when the knee tips in, so adducts into the midline of the body, right? And so one cue or one thing about this is that anytime that the knee is tapering in, or if there's a deviation, let's just say there's a deviation in the body, force is improperly translating from the ground and up, and so on and so forth. So in the general population, or in an athlete, if they're walking, running, or jumping, right, that force is translated to the mid-knee. And from that mid-knee, you could really rupture or, hurt whatever's within the knee itself, the knee structures. The one cue to get out of that, to teach people, is you can create biofeedback by audio, saying, hey, make sure you turn your knees out, screw your feet into the ground, open the knees, so on and so forth. If that doesn't work, then you can create a physical feedback where you can put your hand to the knee. You can put a band around the knee, say, I want you to push against this, right? So that's letting the body know that there's a sensation there. Let me fight against it. Now, if that doesn't work, okay, then from there, it's going to be really training the muscles that you believe are inactive, right? Or they're not properly moving as intended to. The next movement that I commonly see that's improper, or not improper, but is compensated, is going to be a heel rise. And heel rise is usually as an individual comes down, as the knee passes 90 degrees, the heels rise. I mean, it's a very common statement, and it's easy to identify. And the heel rising, it comes from a multitude of things, right? It could be the calf is really, really tight, so the soleus and the gastroc, and it's pulling the heels off the ground, which then takes the balance of the body forward and allows the torso to tip forward. Or on the flip side, it could be that the hip flexors are really tight, and it's allowing the body to lean forward. Therefore, the heels have to catch and balance out, so you're on your toes, right? One way to identify that is put plates underneath the feet, right? So if the plates are underneath the feet, right, and as it's at an elevated position for the heel, so that's decreasing the stretch in the calf. So if in the event that the individual comes into the squat, right, and the squat looks fine, there is no heel rise, there is no movement. Now we know that the compensation was coming directly from the calves. Yet, if in the event that you put the weights underneath and the person does continue to fall forward and does continue to heel rise, now we know it's coming from the hips. And so those are two different areas that we can kind of go around with. And so the compensations are different and the cues are very different. And the cues are going to be a pushing the hips back, strengthening the glutes. Let's stretch out your hip flexors. Let's stretch out your calves. You know, there's a lot of different things that come into play. And it's not just one simple thing. We want to look at everything from a global aspect and not just from a local aspect. The next movement that we go into is the conventional deadlift. So the conventional deadlift, keeping feet shoulder width apart, feet underneath the bar. That's a very common thing. You want to make sure that the shoulders are not way over the bar. Therefore, you're going to create some compensations. And so, again, I create the same type of views. I create the interior, the lateral. So you can kind of see how the movement should be placed. You want to keep that spine very neutral. The compensations that I usually see within this is going to be again, knee valgus. Knee valgus is very common. Again, it's the same concept and the same cues as you would for squatting, right? Putting a band, creating auditory feedback, or also focusing on those muscles that need to be fixed, if you would, strengthened. And then the other one is thoracic rounding, right? So thoracic rounding is if an individual is pulling instead of pushing, right? And that sounds like a very misleading concept, but the idea is that in a deadlift, it's not necessarily a back motion. It's not something that the back is very active and dynamic in. The back is acting as an isometric hold, right? The scapulas and traps are really locking in place to therefore lock the shoulders in place. And what you're doing is you're pushing from the ground and allowing the glute to bring you up into extension, right? So now, if in the event that you're thoracic rounding, that's telling me that you could have very weak erectors, right? So we have to work on your erectors, and you know that could take some time in the sense of doing different corrective exercises and so on and so forth, such as Supermans, or teaching you how to hip hinge once again, and then going through different movements and having you, say, hold the deadlift in a position that you can hold the scaps in place at a lighter weight. And those are the cues that when we speak to athletes, when they can transfer that over, it'll be beneficial for them in sport. Now, I want to put this out there. Thoracic rounding isn't excessively bad, right? Because in sports, right, we're always in very contorted positions. In daily life, we're in contorted positions. Thoracic rounding is very common. And so that commonality with thoracic rounding, you know, we just want to make sure that we can maintain and recognize. And that's what a lot of these movements and these compensations come from, and the cues to change them come from. If you can practice it correctly within the gym, you can practice it correctly on the outside. Finally is the bench press. So I kind of give you a view of just from my chest down. The one thing with the bench press is you want to make sure that your hands are roughly shoulder width apart. You can go 1 to 1.5 lengths out, or you can go wider depending on how your shoulders feel. And when you grip the bar, you want to imagine, in the sense, the term, an easy way to think is breaking the bar. And the concept, that cue, is what I use in order to create external rotation to the bar itself. So therefore, the individual is really gripping on the bar hard and not allowing any changes or in heavy internal rotation to the shoulders. And so the compensation, the first one that I show, is as the elbows flare out. So that flare, anytime there's a flare, that's telling me that there is weakness within the shoulder, right? There's weakness within the external rotators, right? And we want to make sure that we can strengthen those external rotators, because if in the event that you're stuck in a very internally rotated position, the internal rotators are very, very overactive or tight, that can lead to impingement, that can lead to various injuries. And so ways to correct that is really focusing on rows, really focusing on mid to lower trapezius work, so overhead positioning, isometric work, and so on and so forth. The final position of compensation that I usually see within the bench is that the bench should be performed flat feet. You should have a very tight and braced core, so the rib cage should be down. So the compensation I'm leading to is a rib flare or thoracic extension, right? And so that rib flare, right, that's one cue that's telling me that you don't have a good brace of the core. And when we speak to bracing of the core, it's not just tightening up the abs, right? It's more of looking at the aspect of the abs surround the spine itself. So if we can learn how to brace the core while using and moving our appendicular skeleton, right? So our arms and our legs, that's telling us in a dynamic action that we know how to brace, we know how to be stabilized. And so that's a big thing with the bench. If you know how to use your arms and move low to the arms while not changing your back position, this allows us to know that efficiently you can move, right? And efficiently you're stabilizing the spine and being safe throughout the whole entire movement. And so ways to correct this is really focusing on teaching deep core exercises. So the plank, working in the dead bug, focusing on glute strength, right? So a lot of that ties into everything. Those, just to kind of wrap this up, I know I'm kind of taking a long time, but to wrap this up, those are the movement compensations that I always see, and a lot of this is very important when it comes to athletes, right? Athletes benefit the most from these movements. I can say that because I've seen it happen. And, if we can identify what the compensations are and the correct ways to cue them and teach different people who learn differently in different cues and different verbiage, right, then we can actually prepare them for sport easily. I'm going to put the references down below. Hopefully I can get some comments as well. If there's anything that you disagree or agree with, please let me know. I mean, I'm more than happy to kind of chat with you and kind of identify what works and what doesn't work. But as far as my references, one reference, I'm going to bring up the book. One reference is, if you can see that, is Corrective Exercise. So the CES, Corrective Exercise Specialist from NASM. So a lot of this book is based upon physical therapy movements, and it's based upon the different planes and so on and so forth, which is stuff that we know, but it's into a deeper dive of how the body should move and the types of movements that we can perform to correct them. As well as the other one, let me bring this up on my computer here. It's an ebook. It's by Dr. Gil Solberg. It's Postural Disorders and Musculoskeletal Dysfunction. So diagnosis, prevention, and treatment. And so with those two, it's kind of giving me a good idea of what to look for and, in the joints and how the joints should move properly and so on and so forth. Again, thank you for giving me this time. And I hope to hear from some of you and give me some feedback on how this video was. Thank you.